99 minutes in at the Stadio delle Alpi, England's mercurial midfield genius Paul Gascoigne took a heavy touch under the green-shirted West German duress, which spewed the ball out, dangerously close to Thomas Berthold. A desperate lunge was followed by the brandishing of the yellow card from Brazilian referee Jose Roberto Wright. Whatever happened now, Gazza wouldn't be able to play in the World Cup final should England get there. By the end of the evening, there wasn't a World Cup final for England after the onset of a penalty shootout with West Germany. For a nation that was gripped by hooliganism and Thatcherite politics throughout the 1980s, and for a football team that had grossly underachieved despite English club football dominating the European scene, Italia 90 was an unmitigated success. Bobby Robson had delivered England's greatest World Cup performance since Sir Alf Ramsey, an enormous 8-year undertaking that saw everything from the hand of God, indefatigable tabloid criticism, and numerous failed resignations. Did you know England won the World Cup in 1966? It's a little known fact. 66 was won in a very English manner and in a very tournament manner. Clean sheets are plenty, and Sir Alf Ramsey declared his England team to be the strongest and fastest in the World Cup. What followed was just as English as the inaugural trophy. Alan Mullery's red card in a semi-final defeat to Yugoslavia in the subsequent European Championships was one of frustrated petulance that foreshadowed the following decade. England remained confident, breezing into the 1970s with that all-too-familiar air of arrogance, only now with the nous to back it up. The World Cup quarter-final generated a rematch between old foes, between England and Germany. What's more, England led 2-0, then the beginning of the end for Sir Alf. Having already lost Gordon Banks to illness, he shot himself in the foot by bringing off Bobby Charlton, allowing Franz Beckenbauer to run riot, which left West Germany overturning the deficit to win 3-2. England had been surpassed. Sir Alf Ramsey's latter days at Wembley were clouded by West Germany reaffirming their dominance in a European Championship playoff, winning 3-1 at Wembley. What followed was indignation when Poland held England to a draw, keeping them at home for the 1974 World Cup. Poland were close to sitting on the World Cup podium 3 tournaments in succession. Meanwhile, England stewed in their expulsion. Netherlands, a team who had barely troubled the world of tournament football, came to Wembley and embarrassed them too, winning 2-0 in between World Cup finals. By this point, Sir Alf Ramsey had become Don Revie, who departed the England manager's hot seat in a new English manner, one that would become more prevalent in the latter half of the 20th century, and well into the century we occupy now. The tabloid newspapers were in full force. The once great Revie couldn't replicate his success at Leeds and negotiated a role as the head of football in the United Arab Emirates, something for which he was thoroughly vilified. An unmitigated disaster for the FA, who had attempted to steady their sinking ship with a company man. Ron Greenwood was that. It was he who returned England to the tournament fold, albeit unspectacularly with a first-round elimination at Euro 1980 and a second-round defeat at the 1982 World Cup. We pick up England's story in the search for another pair of steady hands, the turn of a manager they initially courted in the late 1970s, and another man who had worked wonders with Ipswich Town, as Ramsey so famously did. Bobby Robson. Bobby Robson, together with coach Don Howe, coached England B and helped bring through talent like Glenn Hoddle, who remained a conundrum throughout Robson's reign. Howe had already tasted senior international coaching under Ron Greenwood's previous regime and would offer continuity to Robson. The former Ipswich manager, who lifted the FA Cup and UEFA Cup within 4 years, had established the Suffolk club as a top 6 English outfit. The optimism wasn't so much an ocean's tidal wave, more so a ripple in a reservoir. Robson appealed to the FA because he produced talent from within Ipswich's academy for the first team, first and foremost being Terry Butcher, who quickly became a regular for the Three Lions. In the new manager's in-tray was forcing a transition away from older squad members who were labelled the Dad's Army. Trevor Brooking and Mick Mills would never play internationally under Robson, but the omission that rankled the public the most was Kevin Keegan's. Keegan had appeared 63 times for England, a 2-time Ballon d'Or winner, but was now in the back nine of his career, appearing for second division outfit Newcastle United. Despite a promising start to the season, Keegan was culled. Other controversies that followed Robson in his new job was the rise of hooliganism. Over 50 fans were arrested in Copenhagen in a Euro 1984 qualifier. It proved a sign of things to come, in terms of fan unrest for matters on and off the pitch, but also for England's form. Denmark had qualified for one tournament in their history and were unfortunate not to win in Copenhagen. Danish Dynamite would implode England's chances of qualifying for the Euros thanks to Alan Simonson's penalty in a 1-0 Wembley win. So would begin the cyclical cries of Robson out and Clough in, as hooliganism raged on under the clouds of the Heysel disaster and consequently English clubs banning from UEFA competition. The national mood was hardly improved by Thatcherite politics and the miners' strike it provoked, as well as a failure to negotiate a television package for football in the first half of the 1985-86 season, and another disaster that befell the sport at Valley Parade. Even the Falklands conflict reared its ugly head, or rather hand, when Argentina exacted revenge in the 1986 World Cup's quarter-final through Diego Maradona's brilliance. Whilst England were handed a kind pathway to return to the World Cup by finishing in the top 2 in a group containing Northern Ireland, Romania, Turkey and Finland, there were important landmarks that led to potential success on the way. John Barnes dazzled in Brazil, Terry's Butcher and Fenwick developed a partnership at the back, Brian Robson maintained his role as a midfield fulcrum, and Gary Lineker was handed a debut that ultimately blossomed into a golden boot at Mexico 86. Life, though, isn't always that simple and linear, as England crashed out pointless and winless at Euro 88, thanks in part to Lineker's hepatitis diagnosis that shackled his performances, as well as the absence of Butcher and the emerging prospect Stuart Pearce. They were also lumped in with a group alongside the imperious Marco van Basten, the revolutionary Valery Lobanovsky and his Soviet Union team, as well as a tempestuous local rivalry with the Irish. The sour mood persisted. It persisted through an unspectacular qualification for Italia 90 and throughout the final days of Bobby Robson's England contract. He was to leave after the tournament, accepting a job at PSV Eindhoven after the FA told Robson of a desire to rebuild, and for that he was labelled a traitor by red-top tabloids. The news that England would be seeded for Italia 90 drew consternation from pockets of European football's elite, as Spain and the then reigning European champions Netherlands were left open to a harder draw. As soon as England were pulled out of the hat to be placed in Group F, the ploy was obvious. Ostracise Bobby Robson's team to the islands of Sardinia and Sicily so their hooligan supporters were less of an issue. The spine of the team from 1986 remained. Peter Shilton, now England's most capped player, kept goal, whilst Terry Butcher shepherded a 4-man defence either side of 2 youngsters, Stuart Pearce and Des Walker, as Gary Lineker continued to bang in the goals up top. Seemingly destined for the nation's scoring record, Lineker wasn't fielded alongside a centre-forward, but instead Peter Beardsley, who was used as a number 10 to devastating effect 4 years prior. Selection issues that plagued England was a lack of fitness for their captain Brian Robson, sidelined until April, whilst Paul Gascoigne's inconsistent form failed to stop the overarching public clamour for his inclusion, but had Bobby Robson undecided. His mind was made up after a masterful Gazza performance against Czechoslovakia in April, which booked his name onto the plane. The draw could scarcely have been crueler, a reuniting of old foes with Ireland, the European champions Netherlands, as well as a stern low block in Egypt. The first encounter's high point was a shinned Gary Lineker goal before Kevin Sheed equalised for Jack Charlton's Ireland. With a third place a route into the last 16, England needed to avoid a hammering against the Dutch and claim a win against the Egyptians. The mood was low. Bobby Robson pivoted from his 4-4-1-1, deploying a defensive 5 with Mark Wright alongside Walker and Butcher. The result the same, a draw against the Dutch, but the performance far greater. And thanks to Wright's headed winner against Egypt, England had won Group F. The draw handed the Three Lions a route to the Final Four that read Belgium and then one of Colombia or Cameroon. Unfortunately, Brian Robson's injury woes struck for a third World Cup in succession. His Achilles tendon failed him and his tournament was cut short again. No fear, his replacement David Platt pirouetted on one of the goals of the tournament with the last 16 drifting listlessly into the penalty shootout. Next were the first ever World Cup quarter-finalists to hail from Africa. A team supposed to be discarded simply, especially once David Platt nodded in an early deadlock breaker. These were the indomitable Lions, however, who had upset Argentina on the opening night and were the toast of their continent. Emmanuel Kounde's penalty and Eugene Akeke sent Cameroon into a lead with 25 minutes left on the clock. Gary Lineker saved the day, as ever. In practicing his penalties the prior day in the stadium, the Spurs talisman was warned of an opposition spy in the ground. He sent his practice penalties the wrong way to his preferred side. Therefore, when Giff wrapped a chance to level the tie-up on 83 minutes, Lineker reverted to his favoured side down the years to take England into extra time. What he didn't bank on, though, was a second chance from 12 yards in extra time. This time, he thrashed it down the middle. England were World Cup semi-finalists once again. There they met the almighty West Germans, who had made the previous 2 World Cup finals. The sweeper system, which had returned after a brief interlude against Egypt, broke up the partnership of Beardsley and Lineker, but the mercurial talent of Paul Gascoigne, as well as the solidity of a defence that now contained Paul Parker on the right, was an overwhelming success. Parker was the unfortunate party that got in the way of Andreas Bremer's free kick on the hour mark in Turin. The freakish deflection let a 40-year-old Peter Shilton bamboozle between the sticks, and the flight of the ball had him beaten. England had 30 minutes to reply. They did so within 20, when a cross from Paul Parker squirmed its way through a West German defence and into Gary Lineker's path. With unerring accuracy, he sent the ball into the bottom corner, provoking the extra time period that became so infamous. What gets lost in the moment of Paul Gascoigne's overbaked touch that led to his clattering of Thomas Berthold and subsequent suspension from a World Cup final is the fact that Chris Waddle struck the inside of the post in added time. So too did the West Germans in a frantic 30-minute period which dawned a new era unto England. Penalty shootout. The man who almost sent England into the World Cup final had the last kick of the game, ensuring the Three Lions wouldn't make it there. Waddle joined Stuart Pearce in faltering from 12 yards, sending his spot kick over the bar and into the Turin night. 4th place after a defeat in the graveyard playoff against host Italy was no failure. Yes, England scraped the group with only 1 victory and relied on the Dutch and Irish to draw all their fixtures. Yes, Belgium were only beaten with a minute to spare. Yes, Cameroon were made a meal out of in extra time. And yes, England lost on penalties. But along the way, with Bobby Robson's siege mentality, the good atmosphere in the camp, Gary Lineker defecating on the pitch, and Paul Gascoigne anointed as Gazza, England were finally a team to be proud of. The fact that Italia 90 was so greatly received by British audiences, and because the World Cup didn't feel the full force of English hooliganism, the country received a massive uptick in its footballing fortunes. Off the back of the horrific Hillsborough disaster, the Taylor Report demanded all-seater stadiums. The formation of the Premier League pumped incredible amounts of money into the game, and the future of club football was safe and shored up for decades to come. The England national team took a more divergent path in returning to success, however. Graham Taylor's reign was saddled by intrusive documentaries, injuries to key players, and disappointing campaigns at Euro 1992, as well as a failure to qualify for the subsequent World Cup. Tabloid pressure remained throughout Terry Venable's reign, and only relented when our hero Paul Gascoigne scored one of the finest England goals of all time against Scotland. He would be destined to play a sorrowful figure, unable to get his studs on a golden goal winner in another semi-final defeat to a now unified Germany, and put out to pasture by subsequent manager Glenn Hoddle. The 21st century saw the FA look to the continent amid a golden generation, but Sven-Goran Eriksson and Fabio Capello failed, just as Glenn Hoddle and Kevin Keegan had before them, just as Roy Hodgson was destined to afterwards. England DNA, St George's Park and Gareth Southgate all played a part in restoring the Three Lions' pride by emulating Sir Bobby Robson's team and achieving a World Cup semi-final on foreign soil before going one better and appearing at a major international tournament final in 2021.